Hello, and thank you for joining us on France 24 for this exclusive interview with the former president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. I am at the headquarters of the Workers' Party in São Paulo with my colleague from France 24 in Spanish, Valeria Saccone. Hello, and thank you for talking to us once again.
Hello, Fanny.
You spent almost 600 days in jail for corruption. A few months ago, your convictions were overturned because the court that sentenced you was found to have no jurisdiction. Overnight, you became eligible to run for office again, and you're now the favorite in the polls for the presidential elections scheduled for October next year. Once considered guilty for all the ills of the country, in a short time, it seems that you have become a sort of savior. Do you consider yourself the savior of Brazil?
I'm not, and I don't want to be the saviour of the nation. I have a vision of the country and of the world of politics, and I think that the gateway to solving Brazil's problems is to govern in the interests of the poorest. We have to include the poor people in the national budget. When you're thinking about all the money that the state receives and how to distribute it, put the poor in first place, because if you don't, there won't be enough for social policies in Brazil or almost any country. So my version of a miracle is to include the poor in the big decisions. When I was president, I organised 64 national conferences to discuss the type of social policies we needed. It worked. And that's why I ended my mandate with Brazil growing at 7.5%. Inflation was totally under control, and we created the largest number of formal jobs in history. While in Europe and the USA, 6 million people lost their jobs, here in Brazil, we created 22 million new jobs.
Conquistamos 22 milhões de novos empregos.
Brazil has become an outcast of the international scene for its chaotic handling of the pandemic. More than 500,000 dead, and many countries have banned the entry of Brazilians because of the variants. You accuse President Jair Bolsonaro of all the evils, but in his place, what would you have done?
Well, what happened is that he didn't take care of the pandemic. He didn't believe in science. He didn't believe in medicine. He invented medicines. He didn't want to buy vaccines when they were available. He did nothing to encourage the wearing of masks and social distancing. That's why I say that he is responsible for a part of all these Brazilians who've lost their lives. That's why I call him an agent of genocide. And a time will come when he will pay for being so irresponsible with the health of his people. So what do I think should have been done? With all the information coming from China and Europe, the president had time to prepare. He should have got together with Brazilian scientists, set up a nationwide crisis committee to ensure that there was a uniform response, a national protocol, with everyone receiving the same information based on scientific criteria. Instead, he fought with state governors, he fought with mayors, he fought with laboratories, with health authorities, Congress, the Supreme Court, with everyone. And we are reaping the results of the incompetence of an agent of genocide.
Então nós estamos colhendo hoje no Brasil o resultado da incompetência de genocida.
You have said several times that in 2022 Brazil will have to choose between democracy of Lula and fascism of Jair Bolsonaro. But in Congress there are 30 parties, there is a parliamentary commission which investigates the management of the pandemic by the government, and there is a Supreme Court which acts with complete independence. The word fascism is a bit strong, isn't it? Might it not be better described as an erosion of democracy?
é uma palavra pouco forte, a gente deveria falar de erosão da democracia, talvez?
Não é uma palavra
No,
forte, não.
it's not too strong. It looks a lot like fascism based on his behaviour, his aggression towards the people, towards women, blacks, trades unionists, workers, previous presidents. The level of rudeness is unthinkable. He seems uncivilised. He should be sent to school to learn about human relations. We have to be tough with him because this is what he is. He only cares about himself and all of the fake news that he generates. A report has just come out which found out that on average he tells 4 lies a day. 4 lies.
President Jair Bolsonaro is convinced that the current electoral system based on electronic voting is not safe enough. He keeps repeating that Brazil must return to paper voting, otherwise the elections will be cancelled next year. Would this be a coup?
Well, believing this nonsense that Bolsonaro comes out with, it's like believing that we're going back to the time of the dinosaurs. There is clear evidence of the honesty of electronic voting. The fact that I became president, because you could never imagine someone from the working class becoming president. And we won in 2002, in 2006, 2010 and 2014, and we didn't win in 2018 because I was in prison. And I was there for the very reason of preventing me from taking part in the elections. So it can be proved that electronic voting is effective. The urns close at 5, and by 7 o'clock, 2 hours later, you know who's the president of Brazil, a country of 213 million. If there's one thing in Brazil that has really worked out, it's electronic voting.
O senhor foi acusado por corrupção e agora o próprio governo.
You have been convicted of corruption, and today the government of Jair Bolsonaro is suspected of corruption in the vaccine procurement scandal. Why does politics in Brazil so often seem to be associated with corruption?
Associada com a corrupção. Não tem política sem falar de corrupção no Brasil?
Eu vou repetir uma coisa. No meu caso,
well, in my case, it's been proved that a lie was constructed with the participation even of the Justice Department of the United States, together with the public ministry and a judge, preparing all kinds of accusations in order to stop me from running for office. I was judged, I was investigated, and I went to give testimony 24 times to the police, the public ministry, the judge. Bolsonaro doesn't let his family give testimony. He doesn't do it himself. And there is strong evidence of the participation of him and his family in a kickback scandal in Rio. It looks like there's strong evidence of corruption in the health ministry with the vaccines. I'm not saying that he's corrupt. I'm saying that he should go naked into the court chamber, just like I did.
Dizendo que ele é corrupto. Eu estou dizendo o seguinte: se coloque nu diante da justiça como eu me coloquei.
In Congress, more than 120 petitions calling for the impeachment of the president have been filed. You said it was too late to remove Bolsonaro from office. In the United States, however, a request for impeachment was filed at last moment against Donald Trump. You don't want Bolsonaro to become ineligible, or it's because you prefer to face an opponent like him, who polarizes the elections?
Talvez uma polarização Lula-Bolsonaro é mais beneficiosa nas urnas.
Veja, não precisa ser polarizado.
I don't think it's necessary to have a polarization between Lula and Bolsonaro. Well, Bolsonaro has to lose the elections because the Brazilian people will defeat him. The Brazilian people will regain democracy. This country wants to become a civilized country again. We've already filed more than 120 impeachment requests. It's up to the President of the Chamber of Deputies. He has the authority to put them on the agenda for them to be voted, and he chooses not to do it. Well, one request in particular has been signed by many public authorities. But the fact is that there's no one there to vote on it. Everything is done virtually. The President of the Chamber is not under any pressure, so he doesn't put it on the agenda. But whether it comes with an impeachment or a ban on running signed by the Supreme Court or via the election process, the reality is that we're close to the end of the reign of this agent of genocide by the name of Bolsonaro.
O discurso radical do Bolsonaro tem provocado cada vez
The radical speech of Jair Bolsonaro ignites the streets. In the demonstrations, journalists, environmentalists and opponents are attacked. In the last election, your own campaign bus was shot at. Aren't you afraid of an attack?
nas próximas eleições, se for candidato?
Well, there are a lot of people around me, people who work with me, who are afraid for my safety. But honestly, I don't work with this in mind. If it happens, the loser is democracy, the loser is Brazil. But I hope it doesn't happen. The ignorance, radicalization, hatred in Brazil, in the US with Trump. We need to work to show people, when you go to vote, you're making a gesture of hope, not a gesture of hatred. And if people think that in Brazil the politicians are no good, then it's up to them to be a candidate.
So you are a candidate.
Because that's how we change the world. And so I can tell you that when the time to decide comes, if I still have this health and desire, then I will be a candidate.
Senhor Lula, o Brasil vive uma situação paradoxal.
Brazil is living in a very paradoxical economic situation. On the one hand, the country prides itself of feeding the world and has just broken records for soybean exports. But on the other hand, we are seeing rising unemployment and the return of hunger, which now hits more than 19 million people. How do you save the Brazilian economy in a post-pandemic world?
Como pensa reativar a economia no mundo pós-pandemia?
This is a paradox of humanity, because we produce more food than we consume. But at least 30% is lost between production and arriving on the shelves. More is lost in the industrialization process, and then you have people not eating because they can't afford it. If people had money, then lack of food would not be a problem. And Brazil has a combination. We have the productive capacity of agribusiness, and we also have that of the small-scale producer, what we call the family farms, which are responsible for 70% of what we eat. So in Brazil, there should be no hunger. The problem is people having enough money to buy food.
Justamente para desenvolver esse Brasil.
But can you save the country's economy without destroying the Amazon and preserving the rights of the indigenous peoples? Because it seems like an impossible equation.
O negócio parece uma equação impossível. Como você vai conseguir isso?
Não é impossível, é ignorância. Você achar que para aumentar a produção.
It's not impossible. It is ignorance to believe that in order to increase agricultural production, you have to destroy the Amazon and invade the lands of indigenous people. Pure ignorance. That's why I say that Bolsonaro is an agent of genocide. Because he doesn't think of anything good, only bad things. You have to use the biodiversity of the Amazon to generate jobs and wealth of a new kind for the region. You have an extraordinary capacity there for the pharmaceutical industry. You have to value those who care for the forest. You could have all the national parks cared for by the indigenous people of the region or by workers who already live there. And you can create new kinds of jobs.
pelos trabalhadores que já moram lá e você pode gerar outro tipo de emprego.
I was president when we set up a fund for the Amazon with the participation of Norway and of Germany.
Então,
There are two errors. First, we can't accept the internationalisation of the Amazon because it's part of our territory. And you also can't go with the idea that the Amazon should be transformed into a sanctuary of humanity.
você pode aceitar a ideia de que a Amazônia tem que ser transformada num santuário da humanidade.
Senhor Lula, seus adversários criticam sua proximidade com Cuba e Venezuela.
Lula, your opponents criticize your proximity to the Cuban and Venezuelan governments. In recent weeks, the Cuban people have demonstrated and demand more freedoms. Journalists have been oppressed.
Como de ativistas.
You continue to justify this.
Dá para defender o atual governo de Cuba e como?
It's not about defending the Cuban government. And if you look back at everything that I've said about Cuba in the past, I'm a Democrat. I like elections. I don't believe in a single-party system. It's not a solution. There has to be a political dispute, an alternance of power. These things help us grow. You don't have to agree with the type of governance. Cuba needs the right to exercise the decisions that it wants to take. But I get a bit upset when you talk of the violence of the Cuban police, because I see on the TV, when there's a strike, what the French police do to the workers or to the Gilets jaunes. I see what the police do in Germany, what the police do in the United States, and I see what the police do in Brazil. So in Cuba, there's the same level of aggression as anywhere else in the world. So let's allow the Cubans to decide without the US ambassador sticking his oar in, shall we? Every country should have the right of self-determination.
Tem que ter o direito, sabe, de autodeterminação dos seus povos.
Thank you, Luis Inácio Lula da Silva. This is the end of this interview. Thank you for watching and stay with us on France 24.